In the land of Moab, far from her home in Israel, a woman named Naomi found herself alone, broken by the loss of her husband and 2 sons. The once vibrant family was now shattered, and Naomi was left to face the harsh realities of life with only her grief and memories. But amidst her despair, there was something Naomi never expected, a bond of loyalty and love that would change the course of her life forever. Her daughter-in-law, Ruth, a Moabite woman, refused to leave Naomi, despite the hardships that awaited them in Israel. Ruth's commitment to Naomi was unwavering. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." With this powerful vow, Ruth chose to stand by Naomi, even though it meant leaving her own country, her own family, and everything familiar to her. What was it that drove Ruth to make such a bold decision? Was it loyalty? Was it love? Or was it the faith that God would guide her path? This is the story of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, a tale of loyalty, redemption, and God's plan that would forever change their lives. As Naomi and Ruth set out on their journey back to Bethlehem, the road ahead seemed long and uncertain. The weight of grief still clung to Naomi, and though Ruth walked beside her, Naomi could sense her own sense of loss. The woman she had once been seemed a distant memory, as though her entire life had been a dream that had turned to dust. Yet, Ruth's quiet presence was a balm to her weary heart. The journey was filled with silence and sadness, but it was also a turning point for both women. Naomi, despite her pain, could not ignore the deep bond that Ruth had chosen to carry with her. Ruth had chosen to stay, to follow her mother-in-law into a land where she would have nothing. This was no simple act. It was an act of profound loyalty and love. Ruth had given up her family, her people, her way of life, all for Naomi. As they traveled, Naomi spoke to Ruth with great sorrow in her voice, trying to make sense of what was happening. Naomi told her, "Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth could not be swayed. She had made her choice, and it was a choice to stand beside Naomi, no matter the consequences. Ruth's heart was not only bound to Naomi by the bond of marriage to her son, but by something deeper, a connection of faith, of destiny, and a love that reached beyond human understanding. "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God." With these words, Ruth made her decision clear. She had chosen Naomi, and in choosing Naomi, Ruth was also choosing something much greater. She was choosing faith in Naomi's God, the God of Israel, the God who had given Naomi strength despite her loss. Naomi, overwhelmed by Ruth's loyalty, knew that this would not be an easy road. Bethlehem, their destination, was a place of familiarity for Naomi, but it was foreign to Ruth. There would be no guarantee of food, safety, or acceptance for a Moabite woman in Israel. Yet Ruth's words remained in Naomi's heart, a constant reminder that love and loyalty were more powerful than any fear or uncertainty. As the days passed, the two women began to form an unspoken understanding. Naomi was grieving, but Ruth was there, offering not only physical support, but emotional strength as well. Despite Naomi's desire to push Ruth away, Ruth's insistence on staying by her side brought Naomi a new sense of comfort, a glimmer of light in a season of deep darkness. They traveled together through the rugged hills and barren valleys, and as they approached Bethlehem, Ruth held Naomi's hand tighter, ready to face whatever awaited them. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the town was buzzing with activity. The people, familiar with Naomi from years ago, recognized her as she walked through the gates, though time had altered her appearance. Her face was marked by loss and sorrow, and when she greeted the people, she could only speak of the bitterness she felt in her heart. "Don't call me Naomi," she said. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." But despite her sorrow, Naomi had something to hold on to, Ruth. Ruth, with her heart full of love and loyalty, was the one constant in Naomi's world, a light in the darkness. Even in the midst of Naomi's deepest grief, Ruth was the reminder that there was still hope, still faith, still a future ahead, even if they couldn't see it yet. Ruth had made a bold decision, one that would change both their lives forever. It was a choice not just of staying, but of believing in Naomi's God, in Naomi herself, and in the promise of redemption that would come through their unshakable loyalty to each other. In the quiet land of Moab, Naomi's heart was shattered. Once, she had lived a life full of love and promise. But now, the passing of her husband and 2 sons had left her alone, struggling to find meaning in a world that felt empty. The vibrant family she once had was gone, and she was left with nothing but memories and overwhelming sorrow. Naomi stood at the graves of her loved ones, feeling the weight of the loss in every corner of her heart. Her mind flashed back to the days when her husband, Elimelech, had led their family from Bethlehem to Moab in search of food. They had hoped for a better life, but little did they know that the path ahead would be filled with trials and heartache. Now, Naomi was not only mourning the death of her husband, but also the loss of her 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. With each passing day, her grief deepened. Her world had been turned upside down. What remained were only the ashes of hope as she wandered aimlessly through her sorrow. With no other family in Moab, Naomi made the difficult decision to return to her homeland in Bethlehem, where she had once found joy. But as she prepared to leave, she faced another heartbreaking reality. Her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, had become like daughters to her. Naomi loved them deeply, yet she knew they could not follow her on this journey. There would be nothing for them in Bethlehem. Their future would be uncertain, and their lives would be much harder than they could imagine. In a moment of deep sorrow, Naomi turned to Orpah and Ruth and urged them to stay in Moab. "Go back to your mother's homes," she pleaded. "May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to me and to my sons." Orpah, with a heavy heart, kissed Naomi goodbye, choosing to return to her own family. But Ruth could not leave. "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay." Ruth's words were firm, filled with love and a commitment that could not be broken. Naomi, seeing the depth of Ruth's loyalty, could do nothing but embrace her. In that moment, Ruth made an extraordinary choice. She would leave her homeland, her family, everything she knew, to be with Naomi in Bethlehem. Ruth's loyalty wasn't just about staying with Naomi, it was about choosing faith, choosing to believe in a God who, though unknown to her at the time, would guide her steps. As Naomi and Ruth settled into Bethlehem, they faced an uncertain future. Naomi, though deeply grateful for Ruth's loyalty, knew that they had little to live on. Ruth, still a stranger in this land, had no means of support, and Naomi, with her grief, was unable to help her in any way. The only thing Ruth could do was work in the fields to gather enough food to sustain them. The barley harvest had begun, and Ruth, with Naomi's blessing, set out to find a field where she could glean the leftover grain after the reapers had passed through. It was the law in Israel that the poor and the foreigner could gather what was left behind by the workers in the fields. So Ruth ventured out into the fields of Bethlehem, hoping for kindness and a little provision. As fate would have it, Ruth found herself in the field of a wealthy man named Boaz, a man of integrity, respect, and generosity. Little did Ruth know, Boaz was also a relative of Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. He was a man who followed the laws of God and took care of the poor and needy, even though his wealth was great. Ruth, a Moabite woman, was an outsider, but she would soon find favor in his eyes. Boaz was overseeing his workers that day, and as he noticed Ruth working hard in his field, he asked one of his foremen, "Who is this young woman?" The foreman told Boaz that Ruth was the Moabite who had come back with Naomi from Moab. He explained how Ruth had been diligently working since early morning, only resting for a short time. Boaz, impressed by Ruth's hard work and her kindness to Naomi, was moved by her character. Boaz decided to speak to Ruth directly. He approached her with a warm and friendly tone. "Listen, my daughter, don't go and glean in another field. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." Ruth, surprised by his kindness, bowed low to the ground and asked, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz answered her, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth was taken aback by his words. She had never expected such kindness, especially from a man of Boaz's stature. His words brought her peace and comfort. She had come to Bethlehem hoping for a way to survive, but now she was receiving much more than she had ever imagined, a sense of security and respect. Throughout the day, Boaz made sure that Ruth was provided for. He instructed his men to intentionally leave extra bundles of grain for her to gather. By the end of the day, Ruth had collected more than enough to feed both herself and Naomi for several days. As she returned home, her arms heavy with grain, Naomi was astounded by the amount Ruth had brought back. "Where did you work today?" Naomi asked. "Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Ruth told Naomi that she had worked in the field of Boaz, and Naomi's eyes widened with recognition. "The Lord bless him," Naomi exclaimed. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." Naomi knew that Boaz was a kinsman redeemer, a relative who had the right to redeem the family property and take responsibility for Naomi's family. This realization filled Naomi with hope. She began to see that perhaps God had already provided a way for them to be saved from their circumstances, and Boaz was the key to their future. As Ruth continued to work in Boaz's fields, Naomi, though hesitant at first, began to see God's hand at work in their lives. Ruth had faithfully worked hard, providing for both herself and Naomi, and Boaz had continually shown kindness. Naomi began to realize that Boaz, being a relative of her late husband, had the right to redeem their family line. He was a kinsman redeemer, a man who could not only redeem their property, but also marry Ruth to continue the family lineage. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of Naomi's home, Naomi spoke to Ruth with a plan. "My daughter," Naomi said, her voice filled with hope, "should I not try to find a home for you, where you will be well provided for?" Naomi's heart was filled with a quiet wisdom as she prepared Ruth for the bold step ahead. She instructed Ruth to bathe, put on her finest clothes, and go to the threshing floor where Boaz would be winnowing barley. Ruth was to wait until Boaz had finished eating and drinking, then, at the right moment, approach him, uncover his feet, and lie down. Naomi's advice was direct, and Ruth, with her trust in Naomi, did not hesitate. With a heart filled with a mixture of nervousness and hope, Ruth followed Naomi's plan exactly as she had instructed. As night fell and the work on the threshing floor was done, Boaz laid down beside the grain heap, exhausted from the day's work. Ruth quietly approached, as Naomi had told her, and uncovered Boaz's feet, lying down beside him. In the stillness of the night, Boaz awoke, startled by the presence at his feet. When he saw Ruth lying there, he asked, "Who are you?" Ruth answered with humility, her voice soft yet filled with resolve. "I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." Boaz, moved by her actions, recognized the deep significance of Ruth's request. He understood that she was asking him to redeem her and Naomi's family, to marry her in obedience to the law of Israel. Boaz was deeply honored and touched by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her willingness to follow the customs of Israel, especially considering that she was a foreigner. He replied, "The Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask." Boaz assured Ruth that he would take care of everything. But there was one small complication. There was another kinsman closer than Boaz who had the first right to redeem Ruth. Boaz, being a man of honor and integrity, promised Ruth that he would approach this man the very next day and ensure that the right thing was done. The following morning, before the sun rose, Boaz went to the city gate where matters of legal importance were handled. He called upon the man who was the nearest kinsman to Naomi and Ruth. Boaz made it clear that there was land to be redeemed, and it was the duty of the nearest relative to take it. But Boaz also added that the kinsman redeemer would have to marry Ruth to carry on the family line. The man, seeing the land as a valuable asset, was willing to redeem it. But when he realized that he would have to marry Ruth, a Moabite woman, his attitude changed. He declined the offer, saying that it would jeopardize his own inheritance. Boaz, ever the man of integrity, immediately took the responsibility. Boaz then declared publicly that he would marry Ruth. He would redeem her family line and ensure that Naomi and Ruth would be cared for. With the legal matter settled, Boaz and Ruth were married, and their story became a beacon of God's redemption. Their union was not just the fulfillment of a law, but a demonstration of God's grace and His perfect timing. Ruth, once a foreigner, was now fully integrated into the people of Israel. Through this marriage, God had woven a beautiful tapestry of love, loyalty, and redemption. As the seasons passed, Ruth and Boaz's marriage flourished. Their union, built on love, respect, and faith, began to bear fruit. Ruth, once a foreigner without hope, was now part of the family of Israel. She had found redemption, not just in her relationship with Boaz, but through her unyielding faithfulness to Naomi, and in her willingness to trust in God's plan. The story of Ruth and Boaz did not end with their wedding. Their marriage was the beginning of something even greater, a legacy that would impact the future of Israel and the world. Ruth soon became pregnant, and after a time, she gave birth to a son, a child who would be named Obed. Obed's birth brought joy to Naomi, who had believed that all hope was lost when she first returned to Bethlehem. In her darkest days, Naomi had thought that God had forsaken her, but now, through the faith and loyalty of Ruth, Naomi found herself cradling her grandson in her arms, a symbol of God's redemption and grace. Naomi, once filled with bitterness and despair, now held a child who would carry forward the family line. She rejoiced and praised God for His mercy and faithfulness. "The Lord has not left me without a redeemer," Naomi said, looking at little Obed. "May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age." Obed, though still an infant, represented much more than a mere child. He was the fulfillment of God's promise to Naomi and Ruth. His birth symbolized the restoration of what was once lost, the continuation of the family line, and the healing of Naomi's heart. The story of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz was not just about the redemption of a family. It was about God's faithfulness to His people, His ability to bring hope out of hopelessness, and His perfect timing in fulfilling promises. Through Ruth's loyalty and obedience, through Boaz's integrity and kindness, God worked in ways that no one could have imagined. Little did Ruth and Boaz know that their son Obed would become the grandfather of King David, one of Israel's greatest kings. Through their faithfulness, God was laying the foundation for the line of David, from which Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, would one day come. This story of redemption in Bethlehem was more than just a story of a family. It was a story of God's plan to bring salvation to the world, to redeem humanity from the curse of sin.